Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Rohit, CEO and founder of Zamp, a sales tech solution that's raised $14 million in funding. Rohit, how are you?
Good, Brett. How are you?
I'm doing great and super excited to have you on the show. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Talk to us about what you're building there at Zamp.
Yeah, absolutely. So Zamp is a sales tax solution, a modern sales tax solution for e-commerce and SaaS companies. The goal is essentially to make sure that companies at the SME mid-market level do not have to touch any part of the sales tax process. Every company in the United States that's selling into the United States has to deal with it. But ever since 2018, e-commerce and SaaS companies are getting really hit on the side. And so our goal is just to make sure that these businesses, instead of spending their time managing sales tax, dozens of hours potentially, and dealing with that liabilities, they are spending their time on revenue generating, profit generating activities, and we can kind of manage this on the back end for them.
For those of us who are not in this space, can you talk to us about the risks associated with not solving this problem and for brands that are trying to do this themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. So sales tax at the most fundamental level is the amount of tax that you are, as a customer, you're getting charged at the transaction level. Essentially, like when you go to the grocery store and you're paying for a box of cereal, it's when you're buying a t-shirt from online, or it could be your scheduled delivery for some furniture being dropped off. It's really that tax that's being paid. I want to just put this into some macro perspective first before we kind of dive into like, why is this really a problem? So in the United States, a couple of years ago, there was about $650 billion of sales tax collected. That year, the US government expected to collect $1 trillion of sales tax. So just generally from a macro perspective, the government is missing $350 billion that they should have gotten. Number two, the way that with the macroeconomic climate is going, you're seeing like rising inflation, interest rates are really high, consumer spending is dipping. Consumer spending is dipping. And remember, we just talked about sales tax being at that transaction level. It means that the businesses are remitting less tax to the state governments. Generally, the government never likes missing out, and they don't like losing out on tax revenue. They especially don't like when it's decreasing, because a lot of that stuff is funding, the roads, school buses, all these things. It typically makes up 30 to 50% of state tax revenue. So now, like, really get into the weeds of it, like, why is this a real problem for companies and what's the risk associated with it? If you don't pay your sales tax, or if you're not charging your end customer that tax, then you as a business are then liable to pay that sales tax out of pocket. You could be liable based on audits or anything like that. And if you are collecting that sales tax and you're not giving it back to the government, which sometimes we see that happen, it's a pretty innocuous mistake, then that's essentially tax fraud, because you're taking the revenue back out of the government's pocket and putting it in your own pocket for working capital needs. The risk becomes, in the first instance, you're just paying potentially 5 to 10% of your margin out of pocket in expenses. And that could be compounded over 7 years, which is kind of audit look back period. Sometimes in Texas, it's forever. So if you never paid it, they're going back for a long time. And on the flip side, you kind of have that second bucket of people that are collecting it but aren't giving it back. That just has potential criminal charges associated with that. So that's really the risk of sales tax. And then those liabilities just compound over time. And remember, like we're talking about, sales tax is about 30 to 50% of state tax revenue, sometimes more. Because it's so high, these states are coming now to collect on that tax revenue. They've increased auditors. A lot of states have initiatives increasing auditors by 2x. And as that collection process continues to increase, we're just going to start seeing more and more audits happen. We're going to start seeing more of that collection coming through, which means a lot of these businesses today that are not compliant are going to either have to be paying out of pocket, or they're going to essentially have to deal with these liabilities in one way or the other.
Are there any numbers around like how many businesses are compliant today?
So, we recently did a study with a couple thousand participants. I can't tell you exactly what percentage of businesses are compliant today in the United States. I can just tell you anecdotally based on that study that we did, plus our customers, like where that kind of sits at. From the study itself, it came out that about 2/3 of businesses did not feel like they were ready to take on the sales tax burden that's associated with Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And this is just brands that we're talking about. That's just kind of one statistic. So, if that's any measure, I'd say like about half to 2/3 don't have this set up correctly or not sure what they're doing. On the flip side, though, if you look at our customers, they're a pretty good indication, just given that over the last year, we've brought on over 400. There is about half of them that are using legacy providers today and that are like, hey, we get sales tax. We know it's a big pain point for us. We know the risk is. We need somebody to do it better. We don't have time to manage this. And that's about half of them. The other half, to your point, they're kind of in this like, hey, we know that sales tax exists, but we don't understand why it's important. And there's like that education component with it. And so I'd say like based on that study, plus just what we see anecdotally, 52, I'd say like about like half the businesses out there, likely even more, just given that a lot of the smaller businesses, there's just a lack of education there. I bet you that they're probably not compliant or dealing with some kind of risk.
Wow, that's crazy. Now, you mentioned 2018 there. What happened in 2018? Is that when these regulations started to really kick off?
I think that's a great question. So do you know this company called Wayfair, the furniture company?
Yeah.
So in 2018, there was this ruling called Wayfair versus South Dakota. Essentially what was happening was when e-commerce businesses before 2018, unless they had people in the state or they had warehouses in the state, they did not have to charge their customers sales tax. Meaning like, let's say entire business operations are in California, but you're selling everywhere in the United States. You did not have to charge sales tax to your end customer in those states. And what was happening was, specifically the South Dakota case, what happened was people would be going into the furniture store and they would say, hey, listen, I want this couch. And now you're paying $1,000 for this couch. You're paying another $100 or so for that sales tax, maybe a little bit less, plus probably another couple $100 for delivery. All in all, you're paying like $1,300, $1,400 for this couch. Now, instead, like you could just go on Wayfair and you can buy this couch for $1,000. You get free delivery. You don't have to pay any sales tax. It's kind of a no-brainer. Like, what are you going to pick? You're going to pick the couch on Wayfair. But what does that mean? Like, what does that actually fundamentally mean? It means that the state is not making that $100 on sales tax that they could have potentially made from you buying it from that furniture store. And so South Dakota was like, hey guys, Wayfair, you need to start paying us our taxes. And Wayfair said, no, go pound sand. Like, we don't owe you shit. So they essentially sued Wayfair, and this went to the Supreme Court, which obviously means it's pretty serious. And Supreme Court said, hey guys, like retroactively, we can't do anything. Wayfair was within the laws. They were allowed to not charge sales tax. But going forward, we're going to let the states decide. We're going to let the states decide whether they want to charge sales tax or not and what those thresholds are going to be. Meaning they kind of create these things called economic nexus thresholds. If you're an out-of-state seller selling into a state, typically, if you're past this threshold of transaction orders or dollar volume, then you have to start charging and collecting sales tax. Before 2018, that didn't exist. So who does that really impact? Like, who are the online sellers that really impacts? It's really just SaaS companies, e-commerce businesses, CPG businesses, these businesses that don't necessarily have a retail presence, because retail means physical locations. Physical locations means that they have to be charging sales tax. When you don't have a physical location, that's where this kind of starts getting dicey, which is why since 2018, you've kind of seen a lot of the e-commerce and SaaS companies come a little bit under fire for that sales tax compliance piece. And I think the government's kind of given people, they said, hey, like 4 or 5 years, we're going to give you guys to kind of normalize and get compliant. But literally starting last year, they've pushed initiatives to increase auditors to kind of drive that right behavior, but at the same time, kind of minimize that gap between that $650 billion and that $1 trillion that they expected.
With so many businesses not compliant, what's the reason? Like, do they think this doesn't apply to them? Do they think it's stupid and they shouldn't have to pay it? Like, is it just too complicated? Like, what are the reasons why businesses are not compliant, would you say?
So it's typically one reason, and that reason is a lack of education. I think smaller businesses just don't realize that this is an issue. And that's what we're trying to do is just with our content, whether it's on socials, whether it's on our website, whatever that is, just drive more education into the system around what is sales tax? What is the risk associated with it? Why is it important? And so I think majority kind of fall in that education bucket. And honestly, like most of the calls that our sales team has, it's not really selling to the business. It's more they're coming to us like, hey, like we know this is an issue, but we don't really know why this is an issue. Can you just educate us a little bit so we understand what the risk is? And it really becomes more of an educational call with our team. And then I'd say the second reason why people are not compliant, it's a lot smaller of a bucket. It's frankly just because they just don't have the resources to manage sales tax in-house. A lot of times with these legacy providers, they're usually self-serve platforms. They don't teach you any sales tax, but you're kind of expected to know sales tax to run the platform. And so people just say, hey, listen, I don't have time to figure this out. Like, I just can't do it. So I'm going to just let it run because I still don't have the education. I don't know what the risk is, but I'm just going to let it run for the time being, and then I'll figure it out. And then they get hit with an audit or, the state somehow find out that they're not collecting or not remitting tax. And then it becomes top priority all of a sudden. And so that's kind of what we typically see. And then there's like this third bucket, which honestly, I'd say is bigger than the second bucket. It's the businesses that are using existing providers, but have not configured their account correctly. And that happens because if you're not telling the system that, hey, this product is taxed this way, or you're not applying the right rules, you're not configuring your account correctly from the beginning, and you're not registering correctly, or you're not accounting for marketplace orders, anything like that, then you kind of have like, when the setup is wrong from the beginning, it compounds the issue downstream, which means you might think you're doing it right, but because you don't really have a second set of eyes on it, you don't have any sales tax experts walking you through like, hey, by the way, this is kind of what you did right. This is what you didn't do right. You kind of get hit like on the side of the train and you're like, holy cow, like what happened here? I thought we were doing things right, but we're not compliant. So kind of the 3 buckets that we usually kind of see pretty often.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
And can you talk to us about that approach you're taking to educate the market and make sure that they're aware of this problem and the risks of not solving it? What does that education program look like?
The education program is largely based on driving content across various different channels for us. And first is founder-led content these days, I think is really important. Typically, the founder CEO, they have a lot of great distribution. So being able to educate at least the folks in their network on the sales tax problem, what's happening, customer stories, things like that. That's pretty key. Second is we put content on our website, and this could be ebooks, resources. It could be just like different blogs on the importance of sales tax, things to think about. Or even if somebody's looking up, hey, like what's the sales tax rate in Salt Lake City, Utah? We have that on our blog. So again, building that trust with the customer to share with them, hey, we're sharing as much as we know about it to best equip you so that if the time ever comes and you're like, hey, I need to help solve this, like we know you're kind of the trusted party. And then the last thing we're doing is we're also having webinars with our partners, putting stuff out in newsletters, going to events, educating people. So just boots on the ground work as well. So it's kind of this holistic approach on education, but a lot of it is just focused around content and getting it in through various channels and working with partners to do that too.
And now, do you view it as it's a software business or is it software plus people? And the reason I ask, I'm talking to more and more companies that are kind of going that route of saying it's, there's a software layer there and then there's also a service layer. How are you thinking about that?
Absolutely. I think more and more companies these days, you're kind of seeing that trend towards this managed solution. I mean, we talked about this right before we jumped on. JustWorks, Deal, Gusto, all these folks, they're kind of that similar to what you're talking about. It's platform layer where you have a services or expert layer as well. And that's really the approach that we're taking too. We combine real-time technology and automation with the people and processes and the sales tax experts. And what that does is, honestly, because we're doing everything for the customer, it actually turns out to be better. And ultimately, those people get involved because you want to improve the customer experience. And especially in a space like compliance, that becomes extremely important. Everything is trust-based. And you kind of want to make sure that you're establishing the right relationship with the customer and you're continuing to maintain that relationship over time and over-investing in that, which is why having people involved becomes extremely critical. And I think we've gone to this age and just generally in SaaS where there was kind of this like previously this like one size fits all model and everybody would try to fit in that model. But now as businesses have been maturing over the last like decade, they want a little bit more of this white glove service. They want to understand things. They want to have things set up correctly for their business needs and not just have this one size fits all platform, which is why these sales tax experts can really help. And especially like in our space where we're dealing with CFOs, controllers that are in the weeds, having those experts on staff really helps with that.
Yeah, I've been a Gusto customer since like 2016 and it's insane. Just like that level of service we get, like the amount of times that I ping them just for random questions and how responsive they are. So I can see the value in this other use case of sales tax compliance.
Yeah. And for you, like, I mean, the thing is like, would you ever move from Gusto just given the service that you have?
No, there'd be like no reason for us.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's the same kind of concept. I think the reason that service layer is getting integrated more and more is because it helps solve also from a business perspective, the leaky bucket problem where you're kind of working so hard to get distribution. You're working so hard to get new customers, but then you have customers churning on the back end where it's like, holy cow, we could have potentially avoided this. Whether it's a sales issue where they should have qualified them out or didn't, or maybe it's a customer experience issue where they were promised something and didn't get what they wanted because you didn't have enough hands on deck or you weren't able to reach their support calls or whatever it is. And so I think that becomes super key to helping maintain that moat with the customer.
That makes a lot of sense. What about building trust with customers? How did you approach building trust early on? Because this is taxes, this is serious stuff. You want to get this right. How did you build that trust?
From the beginning, I'd say the first thing that we started doing literally since the first couple months is putting content out there. Content, I think, is king, and it helps win that trust with both the ecosystem, your customers, your partners. And you just never know. And especially in the beginning, like you're trying to scrape for anything possible and get people to trust you. But asking somebody to trust you is one thing, but demonstrating that you actually know something and then having them trust you is another thing. So we kind of leaned on the latter side of it. The second thing is from the trust perspective, getting distribution early on is one of the hardest things. Getting your first 5 customers, probably one of the hardest things to do. And I think for us, we also leaned on the expertise that our team had. So I was very intentional about how we hired people from the very beginning. The first 5 out of 6 hires that we made, they were all from the sales tax space, all of them working at one of these legacy providers, except for one person. And we did that very intentionally. And that one person was our product person. I wanted him to come in with a fresh set of eyes and build something extremely innovative for us and lead that charge. And for us, that trust that we've built through the experts that we brought on, through the content, and also through existing relationships, that became kind of what we leaned on over time. And then I think from there, we kind of just compounded that. We're like, okay, now we're starting to do content. How can we do more content on social? How can we do more content with partners? What are the mediums of content can we do? Hey, should we be putting this in newsletters? Like, well, what kind of newsletter should we launch? And so that just becomes more and more important. And I think the second thing, just generally when it comes to trust, is you can't just have a take mentality. You got to give a little bit and then have the take mentality. And I think generally our team's been really good about making sure that we give first and add value before asking for something. And it becomes extremely important, especially when it comes to your earlier customers.
If we look at that content engine, what does that look like? Is that an in-house team? Did you partner with a content marketing agency?
It's all done in-house. It's all done by me. At Twitter, LinkedIn, it gets some help from our team when it comes to messaging, when it comes to topics that we want to talk about, potentially lean into, things that they've seen work super well, messaging that needs to align with kind of brand. But yeah, it's all done in-house, partly because generally I think for revenue generating and for product and engineering functions, I don't fully believe in outsourcing teams. I think that's very core to the business and it should be kept in-house along with customer experience. I think a lot of the ops stuff could potentially be outsourced, but I think when it comes to revenue generating activities, when it comes to customer experience, when it comes to product engineering, that should absolutely be kept in-house. And that obviously goes in line with the marketing side.
How much time would you say you spend on LinkedIn or just on social in general, creating content, posting content? What's like your time investment every week?
So that's a good question. I ask myself that every week. I'd say like probably spend about 6 to 8 hours a week on content generation. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. I think over time, it's definitely been getting less. So I think these days it's probably on the lower end of that, maybe even like 4 or 5 hours, give or take. I have a lot of great help from our team, especially like we recently hired somebody, her name is Paulina. She runs kind of the social side for us. And she's been awesome in kind of helping us get there and reducing that time down too.
How do you justify that time investment? Is it just based on your gut? Do you have Gong set up and you're listening to sales calls to see if people are saying, oh yeah, I follow your founder on LinkedIn. I see him posting. Like, how are you measuring to make sure that's worth it?
That's a great question. And a lot of last year was kind of spent asking myself that question. When I looked at a lot of these, I think there was kind of a wave. There's this late 2010s to I'd say like 2021 wave where a lot of these founders, they were kind of building through momentum. And they didn't necessarily do content. They didn't need to lean into these distribution channels. I think since 2022, number one, LinkedIn has changed to be a little bit more content friendly. It's gone from just being a networking tool to actually pushing content. And you kind of see it with things like video and all that coming up. But one of the pieces of feedback I got last year when we were first starting this was, hey, like you need to focus on distribution. And I was like, okay, like what's a quick hack or quick way for me to do that? That's not going to require getting out hundreds of calls, not knowing where this is going. It's okay, building out content. And a lot of people had told me that. So last year, I did it all myself. I was kind of the marketing team in the beginning and was writing content every single day. And I was like, you know what? Like, I'm going to start 2 days a week. Somebody told me, hey, you got to do more. Then I went 5 days a week. Then somebody was like, you might want to try more. And I was like, okay, you know what? We're going to 7 days a week, writing content every single day. Over time, I refined it. And then that kind of started towards like the tail end of April. But I started writing content every day, probably towards midsummer. After midsummer happened, then you kind of get into a lot of the shows and exhibitions and stuff like that, where you're meeting people on the ground. And that's really where I saw a lot of that value because I started meeting people and they're like, oh my God, you're the guy that writes content whose posts go viral and they get hundreds of thousands of views. And that itself was huge because for me, that means I'm building trust with the end customer. And yes, it's obviously flowing into booking value and things like that. But I think for me, building that trust with the end customer at one point or another is just key. And so as I started seeing that momentum anecdotally, I started leaning into it a little bit more and more. And then as I started seeing partners telling us, hey, like I saw your content, or hey, like I saw you posted XYZ, or Maybe it's customers saying that during our sales calls. Then I started leaning into it even more. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm managing this full time right now. I'm writing and doing everything. Maybe I can get somebody to help me as well, figure out what to write. What are things that we should be focusing on? Maybe there's like some positioning I could do that's better. And that's when we really brought in somebody to kind of help on the social content side too.
What's your like all-time banger post? Did one stand out as like that one like just got a lot of reach and seemed to really resonate and spread?
So over this, like, I'd say last 12 months, for some reason, people just like hearing about failure. And I used to post a lot about company stories. So it'd be stories of companies that are growing really fast, or it could be stories of companies that maybe aren't doing super well or whatever that is. And, I'll give you an example, like something Navy that was a celebrity brand, the kind of Hello Bello shut down. Both of these posts had gotten almost 400,000 views and thousands of people like them, which is crazy. And then you kind of have like other posts where I'm talking about Olipop, Liquid IV, Athletic Brewing, Supergoop, Mudwater, Golden Goose, Sol de Janeiro, all these posts. I mean, they did pretty well too, don't get me wrong, but it's like 150, 200,000 impressions. And it's obviously way less comments. And I'm thinking in my head, like, holy cow, people just like either A, hearing about other people's failures and learning from them, or B, I think everybody internally is a little bit sadistic and just like seeing people fail.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their US and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
Yeah, I have one of those pulled up right now. So, just to read the headline for the audience, vitamin brand Care of shut down last week after being sold for $225 million in 2020. Here's what went wrong. And you've just kind of broken it out line by line, diving deep into it. Where are you getting those insights from? Are you just kind of analyzing it and you're looking at media reports? Like, where are you getting those insights from?
That's a great question. And I've been asked that question so many times, which is why now, like, I've actually put it in a newsletter. I think it's like a Substack called Sales Tax CEO, where I put in the footnotes, I put all of the sources to all the content. It's really a mix of things. It'll be from podcasts like this. It will be from media channels, people on the news. It could be people writing in newsletters, whatever that is. But I really find that in podcasts, you can really get some of that granularity that maybe they're not saying elsewhere, just because it's a little bit more raw. But I go through some of that. I think with a lot of the AI tools, it's made it a lot easier to parse some of that text and content out. And then secondly, I think having been in the investing space for almost a decade across private equity, growth, early stage venture, I have some fortunate relationships in the space where they can kind of give me some directional guidance on, hey, does this look right? Does this not look right? They're not going to provide me exact numbers, but I think they can give me some initiatives that folks are working on or things that work that could be helpful.
Outside of founder-led content, what else are you doing to drive growth?
Growth is really, for us, it's two things that we're focused on. A is partnerships. The other bucket is inbound. I think generally there's limited levers within growth. I think it's like partnerships, inbound, and outbound to some extent. And within that, there's different things, right? Like within outbound, there's like warm outbound, cold calling, email outbound, things like that. Inbound could be organic, paid, SEO, social content, things like that. And then you kind of have this partnership bucket of referral partners, white label partners, platform partners, things like that. But for us, like the kind of key buckets are inbound and partnerships. The reason is because, like imagine like somebody came to you and they're like, hey, listen, I want to do your taxes and I think I'm really awesome. And here's other people who think I'm really awesome. Do you want to work with me? You're going to be like, this is weird. If you're so awesome, why are you emailing me? Then you kind of get into this thing of, okay, how do I lean on the trust that's either already been built in the ecosystem, or how do I build trust with that customer? And so that's kind of where you see, I think on the latter, the inbound side really kind of kicking in. And this could be meeting people where they are. And that could be, hey, like I'm just looking up some content. I want to know like sales tax for groceries. I'm finding Zamp as a top search term. Okay, great. Like I know that they do that. I'm going to go back when I have more content. And so a lot of times we see like in our CRM, we see people that visited a lot of these resource pages and then they'll convert or they'll sign up for a newsletter and they'll kind of realize a few months later that, hey, I actually really need this. And then you kind of have this second bucket within inbound of let's get those high intent people. Can we capture those people on the paid side? Can we capture people through, newsletter sponsorships or through other areas that are going to drive brand awareness where somebody that has an acute pain point is then going to be able to convert? It's just a question of like, where are those channels and how do you get that? Paid is like pretty easy to set up and pretty fast to test. It's just going to be a question of, hey, like, do you actually have product market fit to sell this on paid? Until you do, I don't kind of recommend it. It's a nice way to get things going, but without product market fit, it's pretty hard. And then that second bucket is really around partnerships, which we kind of touched on. These are people that these are partners that we've built relationships with and that they trust our product and the way that it works, whether it's through clients that have worked with their clients that we've supported, or it could be they have existing relationships with our team whom they trust, things like that. So we've kind of leaned on these partners as well, kind of built that base. And for us, like that one-to-many approach is really key. Anytime you can get that one-to-many approach working and, juiced up, I think that's always going to be a huge win for the team. Typically, I'd say partnerships tends to happen later in the company kind of life cycle. I'd say it typically happens when you've kind of reached that product market fit level as well. And so, yeah, those are kind of the two big engines, but inbound is something that we started very early because that's just stuff that takes time, especially inbound organic, inbound SEO.
For founders who have product market fit and they're getting ready to build out their partnership program, what advice do you have for them? And the reason I ask, I think everyone's talking about partnerships right now. A lot of the conversations I'm having with founders, marketers, everyone's talking about partnerships. So what's some advice there?
Two things. Number one, go narrow and deep. The reason I say that is because too many people are focused on signing paper than actually engaging in a partnership. A partnership's about not just actually engaging with one another to help grow and work together to build each other's businesses. And I think people forget that. People think a partnership is a partnership just because they signed a piece of paper, just because, for whatever reason, like Meta or Snapchat or, pick your company out there to sign this piece of paper with me doesn't mean anything. Like, are they going to send me leads? Are they going to work with me? Are we going to co-market things together? People are too focused on this volume game instead of quality game. That's what I mean by going narrow and deep. Find like the 2-3 partners that really resonate with you that are the most closely, and then just kind of work with them specifically. Don't worry about the volume. I think that will kind of come over time. If after you do a great job with one partner, then others will slowly start to hear about it. You kind of have to lean on that word of mouth a little bit. The second thing I'll say is from a partnership perspective, one of the things that has worked super well for us is just being able to give to the partner before we make any ask, or actually adding value into their system first. And this isn't to go with just partnerships. It goes with customers. It goes with just people in the ecosystem. You never know who you're going to be sitting across. And so add value where you can. When you say that you're going to follow up, like follow through on your actions where you're adding value to someone else's business. And I bet you that's going to pay dividends in the long run. I've helped, a handful of founders raise money last year, even like this year, right after our Series A announcement. And now like those same founders, they've just completed their raise and they're like, hey, listen, we have a sales tax issue. Thanks for helping us. You were my first call. Let me know what I need to do here. And that is pretty key. And yes, those are customers, but kind of partnerships, same model. Just go deep, build relationships with people, and actually add value to their business too. It's not just a take mentality, which I think, I don't know, too many people have these days.
Yeah, agreed. Now, what about fundraising? So obviously you've been an investor, so you sat on that side. Now you're a founder of this company. What have you learned about fundraising throughout this journey?
Yeah, fundraising is freaking hard. I think it's when you're on the other side of the table writing the checks. But no, I think in all honesty, we were kind of at an interesting point. We started fundraising towards the end of 2022 into 2023. So we got kind of caught with some of the macro headwinds. I'd say when it comes to fundraising, the things that I've learned is number one, build relationships with people who you really want on the cap table. In the early stages, they're really betting on you. This is like, you're talking pre-seed, seed stage founders. Like they're really betting on you as a person, like your ability to hire, your ability to execute, things like that. So it's kind of like any relationships or a friendship or whatever you have. Those things take time to cultivate. If you're just reaching out to people last minute and you're like, hey, you want to put in a $5 million check into my business? I don't really know you. They're going to be like, well, I don't know how I feel about that. Especially in this market where either a lot of that money is going towards AI businesses and you're not an AI business, or even if you are, how do you become the one that they pull the trigger on versus the other who might be your competitor? So building relationships, super key. It's something that we did. Lean on the relationships that you have today. Maybe ask them to make some intros and lean on their street cred. That really helps. The second thing is from a fundraising standpoint, keep things pretty tight. I think you don't want to be in the market for too long. Typically, if you're in the market for too long, it's never really a good sign. Investors talk a lot faster than you think. News spreads like rapid fire. And we just announced our Series A last week, and I have probably 400 emails in my inbox from investors. So not that that's like any one specific indication, but I think building relationships is probably the most important. And the second thing is I would just keep your fundraising processes pretty tight.
Final question for you. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision look like?
You mean for me or Sam?
Yeah, let's focus on Zamp.
Yeah. So I mean, for us, from a business perspective, we want to focus on, today we focus on sales tax. Next, we're going to start focusing on international tax, supporting the requirements of businesses selling globally. We want to get to a point where we're doing hundreds of millions in revenue just on the indirect tax side of things. But I think there's also a massive opportunity to help support businesses across the same vertical, across maybe various functions, whether it's, various accounting functions, various finance functions, things like that. So I think ideally, I At that point, we've fully taken off indirect tax compliance off of people's plates. That's the real focus. We want to enable more businesses, more founders, more small business owners to kind of achieve their American dream. Too many businesses these days are shutting down because sales tax is an issue. And the second thing is we want to figure out a way to do it so that they're spending zero time on it at all. And so in the next 3 to 5 years, we're kind of hoping that instead of spending 5 minutes, that dwindles down to 0 minutes. And it becomes a point of a pride for them that they're working with Zamp.
Amazing. I love the vision. All right, man, we're going to wrap up here. Before we do, if there's any founders that are listening in and want to follow along, where do we send them? It sounds like LinkedIn's the place to go.
Yeah, you can either send them to zamp.com. You could send them to me on LinkedIn. I'm Sales Tax CEO on Twitter. But yeah, zamp.com always works well. My email is Rohit, ROHIT @ZAMP.com.
Amazing. Thanks so much for taking time, man. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely, Brett. I appreciate having me on.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.